Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Lovely to have your company this Sunday morning. I'm joined now in the studio by Dr. Liam Fox, Conservative MP for North Somerset, because he's got this book out, The Coming Storm. And this is a really interesting topic, Liam, that, to be honest, I haven't given much thought to, and now having read some of this book, I feel I should give more to it, because you're basically saying that you think water will write the history of the 21st century with profound implications for both humanity and the planet. So let's just start by saying, what do you mean by that? Water will write the history of the 21st century.
Well, I wanted to write the book for three reasons. Number one, that I have a profound belief that every human being has an absolute human right to clean water and sanitation. Secondly, the competition for water as the population grows but the water supply doesn't is a potential cause of conflict around the world. And thirdly, the absolute scandal of how much garbage we're putting into the seas and oceans, which is a crime against the environment. And everyone talks about CO2 and so on, but we're actually poisoning the seas around us. And these things together, I think, create a huge momentum for potential problems as we go into the rest of the century. One
of the points you make in the book really strongly is this relationship between China and Tibet over water and access to fresh water. Now, again, you'd think that, you know, some of China's behaviour on the global stage was motivated by other factors, but you seem to be coming to conclusion that a lot of it is about water. Just explain that for our audience.
So you've got a number of different things coming together here. And of course, we're not very good at joining the dots because foreign policies in one place, defence policies in another, climate policies in a different one. Just take that case of Tibet. About 40% of all the people on our planet today get either their drinking, their agricultural or industrial water from a river that arises on the Tibetan plateau, the Indus, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Mekong, Yellow, Yangtze. China now controls the headwaters of all of those. And the waters in Tibet have a particular problem, that the glaciers are actually melting faster than anywhere else in the world. Why, you might ask? The answer is not just the amount of CO2 that's going into the atmosphere from China and India, but what they actually burn. And because they burn coal, it leaves a very thin black layer on top of the snow that actually absorbs heat rather than reflecting it. So the argument's much more than just how much CO2 we produce. It's also what we use to produce it and the impact that has on other things. And there are about 56,000 dams in the world, and about 28,000 of them are in China. China's getting ready to be able to harness water if it becomes an issue of shortage.
And do you also think that water has played a part in some of the conflicts in the Middle East? That's another conclusion I think you draw in this book.
Well, we've long known, for example, the Euphrates Basin in Iraq and Syria and the Jordan Basin in Israel. These are areas where competition for water has always been a potential cause for conflict. A little further down in Africa, you've now got Ethiopia having filled the Grand Renaissance Dam. Now, when I wrote the book more than 10 years ago, the argument was that no one would ever allow Ethiopia to build this dam because it would have control over the Nile, and Egypt and Sudan wouldn't allow it. Well, they didn't have the military capabilities to stop it. Now Ethiopia effectively can turn the Blue Nile on and off. Not to say that they will, but you've got this growing tension between what we might call the upstream countries in the world, the ones that control the headwaters, and the downstream countries who depend on them. So you're going to have an increasing tension there. And as we suffer from more pollution, as we suffer from more drought, as we suffer from a bigger population, you can see where these tensions take us.
I mean, are we doing quite well? I had Graham Stewart on earlier and he was talking about, you know, this net zero target and all the rest of it. We're doing well, aren't we, in bringing our emissions down in the UK? We're doing well on things like recycling. We don't seem to be doing very well at all when it comes to, just to make it domestic for a moment, our rivers and our seas and how much pollution and sewerage is being pumped into them. I mean, do you think that the water companies need to be doing far more about this? What's your take on that
Far more.
situation?
There's too little investment in infrastructure and too much emphasis on dividends.
Yes.
But you also need to keep it in perspective. I was just in Budapest at Easter, sitting on the Danube, which by the time it gets to Budapest is quite clean. But you go further down and you'll discover that even in a bad year like last year in Britain, when we had all that excess flooding and taking some of that waste into the rivers, It is 1/1,400th of what goes into the Danube in a normal year.
Wow.
And so we do need to think about these things in a global context. And one of the points I was making in the book is you cannot deal with global problems from a national context. We need to have global agreements. And you've got 4 countries, China, Vietnam, Thailand and Indonesia, putting more plastic into the oceans every year than the whole of the rest of the world combined.
But then you can sense people's frustration. They say, well, we're doing everything we can. We're using 8 different bins. We're separating everything. We're doing our best. And then you get a statistic like that. I mean, when it comes to microplastics in the oceans, is this something that can ever be solved? And I don't want to be negative because I think we have great hope. We have wonderful clean-up operations on British beaches. I know school children particularly have been emboldened to try and clean up the shores. That's wonderful. But microplastics is a problem that's going to be around for decades and decades to come, isn't it?
Well, we've just had our first microplastic snow in Antarctica.
Wow, that's so depressing.
It is literally everywhere on the planet now. And, it's estimated about a quarter of all the fish that are landed in markets in California have some plastic in their gut.
What can we do? I mean,
so we do
it's
need
too big a problem, it seems, to solve.
Nothing is too big a problem,
okay.
but we need to recognise that we need international cooperation on this. And countries like China, which is the worst culprit in the world, producing about 60 million tonnes of plastic a year, less than a quarter of that's actually recycled. So we need to be getting international agreements on recycling.
How hopeful are you to get agreements with China? I mean, you can speak as well as a former Defence Secretary. China doesn't have proper representation at things like COP. So it seems like the Western world's banging its head against a brick wall, frankly.
Well, there are other tools. I mean, there's a big debate around should we have a carbon border tax on countries like China who are undercutting us economically by polluting the world more than anyone else. And we also have to get in perspective the timescales and the size of the problem. So Britain produces 1.01% of all the CO2 on the planet. China produces about 29%.
Yes.
So it's all very well talking about net zero targets. What we really need are the big polluters to stop polluting as quickly as possible. And all these problems are linked together. Climate, security, trade, what we eat. I made a point in the book that it takes 1,500 of litres of water to produce 1 kilogram of beef, but only about 600 to produce 1 kilogram of chicken. Our dietary habits also have a big impact on how much water is used in different parts of the world.
So you're not advocating vegetarianism, but maybe advocating less red meat and more white meat.
Well, it makes sense to produce things like meat in countries that have got lots of water, but not in countries where water is a shortage. We've got to think ecologically about the balance of trade in the world, something we've not even started to think about.
All right, well, let's show the book again, The Coming Storm by Liam Fox. Hopefully you can see that. I mean, you've delved into a subject that I think probably most people are quite ignorant of, so it's definitely worth the read. And thank you for going through the details of that this morning. It's been lovely to see you in the studio.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Liam Fox.